Let's start with a man, another feature of the Coping Corner, someone we talked about a lot for the panic meter submissions. That is Justin Jefferson going to Dallas to take on a very generous Cowboys secondary. Like, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can just see Boone's face. It's just perfect for, oh my God, how are we still in this position where we're talking about Justin Jefferson for the fantasy freaking trust meter? And look, Boone, I'll start this one. I've got no trust. How can you have any trust? How could you possibly? I'm not going to go so far as to say you're cooked, because at least J.J. McCarthy gave us a positive performance. Truly his first positive EPA per dropback performance of the season in a very strong outing against a very generous Commanders defense. And yet Justin Jefferson still did nothing from a fantasy standpoint. Wide receiver 73 on the week, as we're showing right now. So how can you possibly have any trust in Jefferson, even in a great matchup?
Yeah, I can't stop shaking my head here, because one of the main things that I kept mentioning when we talked about Justin Jefferson, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, every time it came up in the panic meter was, man, that schedule, though, when we get to week 14 and on, those last 4 weeks, the schedule is incredible, right? The schedule is so good, and yet it's not going to matter, Harmon. I totally agree with you. It's no trust. He faced the Commanders this week, obviously. The Cowboys, the Giants, and the Lions. Those are the three that he has remaining. Those are 4 of the 5 easiest defenses. The last 4 matchups, 4 of the 5 easiest defenses to face for fantasy receivers. And yet we're still sitting here and saying, I have no trust. I just have none. I don't know what's going to change. Like you said, J.J. McCarthy had an okay game. Like, I know the stats were good from a fantasy perspective. Yeah. I didn't think it was incredible. There were definitely some positives to take from it. He was getting the ball out quick. He seemed a little more like confident or comfortable out there than he had in some other matchups, but also it was a very easy opponent he was facing. Now, he's going to have some, I don't know. I don't even want to get into it, because producer Colin will go crazy if we talk about how bad that Cowboys defense still is, but up front, they have gotten better. No doubt up front, they've gotten better. Maybe they'll get a little pressure on him, but you can still throw on this Cowboys defense. So yes, they should have success, but they just had some success through the air. And like you said, Jefferson, it's just not happening for him, right? Like 4 catches for 15 yards over the last 2 weeks. How is this real? How is this actually what's happening to Justin Jefferson? Is he even going to hit 1,000 yards? And I know that's it's a trivial number. Like, we all pick 1,000 yards and then the season gets 1 game longer. We still talk about 1,000 yards. Like it, really matters. It doesn't yet. Right now he's at, I believe, 810 yards. And I'm not confident at all that he's going to be able to get over 1,000. That's just where it's gotten to with Jefferson. And I feel bad. Could he potentially pop up for a game or two? He could, certainly, with these matchups. Could he find the end zone at any time? He's definitely capable of that. He also seems like he's trying to get through it, right? Like, he seems like he's trying to stay positive. He's like, giving props to McCarthy still. Like, he's being that good team guy, that leader. He hasn't gone like the diva receiver route where he's pouting. We've seen so many receivers do that. So that's great to see. Yeah. And yet still he's not getting the targets. And I just don't know what we can look to say, okay, all of a sudden that light's going to turn on, and this McCarthy, the JJ to JJ thing that we thought was going to emerge as something this season, that all of a sudden that's going to start to produce. I don't think it is.
Yeah. I don't know what we could call it, but there needs to be like a good soldier award in the NFL, and it needs to go to Justin Jefferson in the 2025 season. I mean, how many other elite tier 1 wideouts would handle this as well as Jefferson has? I mean, like, the worst thing that's happened is he ducked the media after Max Brosmer's start in Seattle, which, like, that's the biggest infraction. Guy who leads the NFL in yards per game since he arrived in pro football. I'm comfortable with that. And then he said after this week's game, well, I'd rather not get the football and win than not get the football and lose. So, I mean, he has handled this as well as you possibly can. He's never thrown McCarthy under the bus, never like glared at him too hard on the field or something like that. Even you can even see during the game sometimes where he takes the low route in a high-low combination when Jefferson's the high route. He like is hyped up for McCarthy when he completes it to the low man. So again, he is handling this as well as possible. Anybody that has him in their fantasy teams is probably not being as graceful in how they are handling this situation this year. That is for sure. JJ McCarthy, 10 of 11 on quick throws and 85 yards and 2 touchdowns according to Next Gen Stats, they kind of changed up the offense a little bit in that they really prioritized getting it out of his hands quickly, getting it to the tight ends in the flat. They went kind of drive by drive with the two running backs. So maybe we do see one more wrinkle here and Jefferson, gets going against the Cowboys. And remember, when we say no trust, it's basically could go either way. Like, we are still talking about Justin Jefferson. If you have to start him this week, and I'll probably still rank him as a wide receiver 2, which is still insane to say because it's Justin Jefferson, but I'll still rank him as a wide receiver 2. And if he's, wide open down the field because the Cowboys can't cover anybody and he waltzes into the end zone, has 90 yards and a touchdown, which would feel like a miracle, you can't be that surprised by it. He is still Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and this is why we always talk about like range of outcomes and, possibilities, probabilities, all that sort of stuff. That's what fantasy really boils down to. And this is just absolute worst case scenario. Like, barring an injury that was going to put him out for the season, this was worst case scenario for Justin Jefferson. This is about as bad as it could get when he is playing all the games and producing this way. I mentioned that schedule. I think the only thing we can hang our hat on is just that McCarthy starts to show little signs like he did last week. You should do well against these defenses. So just keep putting, little win by little win together, start to get more comfortable. And then maybe going into next season after a full off season, you'll be able to feel even that much more comfortable and the team will stick with them. But they're going to bring in competition. And unless we do see something pretty significant from him in these easy matchups, I would think they're going to bring in somebody that could potentially actually beat him for the starting job next year.
Yeah, I was saying all last week, Marcus Mariota, Vikings quarterback 2026. Then Marcus Mariota threw a pick 6 against these Minnesota Vikings. So I don't know, maybe that will dissuade them from that. But that's the type of competition, like someone that we've actually seen start games and be good and can legitimately push McCarthy. Because hopefully this is the type of end of season where he can just stack some solid moments. Like, that's all we're asking. Stack solid moments, be comfortable in this offense, look functional, and we'll see what happens next year. So I'm going to be open-minded to that down the stretch, but the range of outcomes has been established of what it is for Justin Jefferson, and the low end of that range is quite frightening. Speaking of low end of the range of outcomes and staying in that same game, let's talk about George Pickens versus the Minnesota Vikings. We finally saw the low end of George Pickens' range of outcomes, which includes bad fantasy performances and Richard Sherman talking about him on the post-game broadcast and George Pickens posting on his Instagram story. That felt very same old George Pickens. But Boone, I will say that the aftermath of that included head coach Brian Schottenheimer saying, "Hey, I talked to George, and it was a very accountable moment. It's really not a big deal." The quote from Schottenheimer, we talked about it. In his words, he said, "Hey, Schotty, I didn't play my best game. Unfortunately, none of us played our best game. But I don't worry about George and his love of football and playing this game," which I really like the way Schottenheimer's kind of handled a variety of situations this year. This one certainly included. I'll be honest, buddy, I got full trust on the George Pickens experience here against the Minnesota Vikings. Tough matchup, of course. You don't like what happened last week, but I'm not too concerned about George Pickens going to this matchup. Do you agree with me on full trust for Pickens in Week 15?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're not going to change our view of Pickens based on one game. Before last week, double-digit fantasy points in every game since Week 1. That was the only other time that he didn't get to that mark. And CeeDee Lamb in concussion protocol, he's got a few extra days, though, because they played early last week. So I feel like he's got a good shot to clear here. Even if he doesn't, either way this goes, whether he's out there or not, I think you're going to start Pickens with confidence because we've seen them produce together all season long. So yeah, Pickens, a top 15 wideout. I haven't done my rankings yet for this week. If not, in the top 12 again. Brian Flores' defense can be tricky, but Dak Prescott's a veteran. He's gone against some tough defenses recently, the Eagles, the Chiefs. He's gone over 300 yards. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in those games. Like, I'm not worried about this passing attack getting there. And I don't think Vegas is either, right? Like, the Cowboys are 6-point favorites. The game's got a decent total at 47.5. So I think there's going to be some points in this one. And we know when that happens, Pickens normally gets involved aside from 2 games this year when he hasn't produced. And just because one of them happened recently, right before the fantasy playoffs, that does not mean that we're going to overreact and do anything crazy and take him out of our lineups. You're going to start him with confidence. He is going to be fine.
No, look, and I mean, going back and reviewing that game, a lot of what happened, especially when CeeDee Lamb went out, is they just put a press corner right on top of George Pickens. And when they got in single high looks, they put the safety shaded towards George Pickens' side, which left things wide open for Flournoy to go crazy in that game. Like Ryan Flournoy legit had an awesome game, and I will admit I have him stashed on a dynasty team. I can publicly finally come out and say that I have him on a dynasty bench, and it is actually annoying because I might lose that game very closely, and Ryan Flournoy's 36 points on my bench. It's just annoying to look at. There was no way I would have started him. It's just annoying to look at, but regardless, I'm at least open. I'm open to the Ryan Flournoy experience. I'm flow curious. We'll put it that way.
Well, I will also admit that this is not the last time that name will come up before the end of the show, Harmon. He may or may not be mentioned in our waiver wire section later. Just have that as a little tease. He might be in the waiver wire section for receivers.
All right, perfect. Another repeat offender and a guy that, look, maybe you were right. Maybe we should have gone Coping Corner last week for Emeka Egbuka. My God, we're talking about it again. Emeka Egbuka, Atlanta Falcons, Thursday Night Football, Boone. How can we possibly have any trust? I can't say you're cooked, right? But I have to say no trust here on the panic meter for Egbuka.
Yeah, I feel like we should be wearing black. Like every time we talk about him, I feel like it's just a bit of a funeral for us. Yeah, I guess you are. Yeah, I didn't get the memo.
I got the black hoodie, black joggers. I've got the black bracelet, the black watch. The fake ring.
Okay, you were ready. You were ready. I'm ready. Yeah, I was not. Because like this was our dude before the season. It might have been the very first show we did together where I talked about him and said, like, I thought that was the best value, right? I thought that was the best value in fantasy drafts in the summer. And he comes out, he looks fantastic. I think we both still have faith that he's going to have a great career in the NFL. And yet something has happened to him here where we just keep adding to this stat. I hate bringing it up every week, but one game with more than 10 fantasy points in his last 8 outings now. And it's been even worse than that, right? Like held under 45 yards in 4 straight games. Like, I don't know. And I said this last week. I don't know what is going to change in the next few weeks where all of a sudden we're going to get the kind of production that we were getting from him earlier in the season. And another guy that has the talent that could pop up for a big performance at any given moment. But do you feel good about him in your lineup after what he's done, which is probably sewer a lot of teams. There's probably a lot of teams that aren't making the fantasy playoffs because they had him in their lineup and because they kept trusting him. I'll go back to that one charity league that I mentioned multiple times where I think he is probably a big reason why I didn't actually make the playoffs in that league. I came up a game or two short, on top of the fact that I had the most points scored against me, but we don't need to talk about that. Regardless, I just don't know what's going to change that's all of a sudden going to make him into anything close to the player we saw in the first month of the season. So yeah, it's too bad, but it is no trust right now. And if you want to take him out of your lineup, unlike Jefferson, I actually think you could potentially take Egbuka out of your lineup at this point for someone else because he's down in the low end wide receiver 2, maybe getting into the high end wide receiver 3 range this week.
Yeah, that sounds about where I'm going to have him. I'm actually juggling ranking him along with one of the other guys we're going to talk about here in a moment. Like, who do I actually trust more? But yeah, look, I mean, here's the deal with the Egbuka stuff. I'm one of those people that that actually in my guillotine league where I'm complaining about Rashee Rice, if I had started anybody else essentially other than Egbuka, I'd be fine. If I'd started Michael Pittman, Jalen Warren, like any of these guys, I would have been fine. Not that I was really considering starting those players, but could have, right? Certainly could have done it. But it is what it is. I might get chopped because of the Egbuka thing, which would be fitting because I was too stubborn to admit that he probably should have been in the Coping Corner on last week's show. Here's the deal. So since week 6, according to Fantasy Points data, he has the lowest catchable target rate in the NFL. 51.4% of his targets have been catchable. That is the second place player is your boy Adonai Mitchell at 58.8%. Like there's a healthy gap. They're the only 2 guys under 60%. There is a healthy gap between Emeka Egbuka and everybody else. And in that same span, again, this is just their charting, but they've got him at a 40% contested catch rate. He's caught 2 of 5 contested targets, and he has 6 drops. Like that's how you get that type of disgusting catch rate he has. Is it's everything. Baker has been off. He's in the role that it's a high degree of difficulty targets, with Mike Evans being out. And maybe Mike Evans plays in this game on Thursday. Maybe he doesn't. We'll know more throughout the course of the week. And it's just like when he has that opportunities, it's been drops, like we saw the one on the out and up where it's definitely a pass that Baker can absolutely throw better. And it is a pass that Egbuka can absolutely catch. So at any moment, one of the two, if not both of the two, can get right. And it could happen on Thursday night. It could happen. It's not a 0% chance. Like, he's talented. He's out there. He's not going to get benched. He is a good football player. I don't want to hear any, nonsense about him not being good. He's good. He's just kind of got the yips right now with the drops, and his quarterback is not playing up to his full potential. So maybe that changes against the Falcons defense that's kind of floundering, but we've been saying that for months and months and months. So that's just the state of the state with Emeka Egbuka. So I don't know, Boone. I know I am personally rooting for him to turn it around. I just don't know that we can have any trust in it.
Yeah, we're not saying that he's cooked for a reason here. And I want to mention that all the guys that we're talking about on this episode, we want all of them to perform well, right? There's names that have come up week in and week out on the show, and we've said some fairly negative things about guys like Egbuka over the last few weeks. And yet I still, more than anything, would love to see him turn it around. And not just for my fantasy teams, for him as a person, for his career. We want to see this guy have a ton of success and get back on track. And it will happen. Just will it happen before the end of this season? I'm not so sure about that.
Not so sure about that. Never quite sure what to do with Jameson Williams, who is our next up and down wide receiver to talk about here. Jameson Williams, obviously coming off a nice game, predictable nice game against the Cowboys on Thursday night last week. He's definitely been better since Dan Campbell took over the play calling, but he's also got a 0 game in there since Dan Campbell took over the play calling. So it hasn't been perfect. He plays in LA, takes on a tough Rams defense, but not a perfect Rams defense, of course, as we know. That secondary can be got. So since Dan Campbell took over the play calling, we got 116 yards, 88 yards, 0 yards in week 12, 144 yards and 96 yards. So mostly good since Dan Campbell's taken over. What's your level of trust on Jameson Williams going into week 15?
I don't see how it could be anything other than full trust here, right? I don't know. Like, is the worry the matchup? Like you said, the Rams are good defense, but they're sort of middle of the pack against fantasy receivers. So it's not like that's a matchup that's going to just completely wipe them off of your lineup. The game has just a bonkers 55.5 projected point total. So Vegas is expecting a ton of scoring, as I think we all should. So fireworks are scheduled for this one. And then you mentioned it, since the bye, touchdowns in 4 of 6 games, and he's been over 88 yards 4 times in his last 5 outings. Like, just because there's that 1-0 performance in there, if he had even 30 or 40 yards in that game, it wouldn't even necessarily catch your eye when you go over his results, right? So because there's that one, there's like the slightest amount maybe in some people, not for me. When you have a guy performing at this high of a level the vast majority of the time, we're good with it. And we don't have to get into the whole receiver conversation that all of them are going to have these down weeks where they might have 0 catches or 1 catch or something, and it's just going to happen. Certainly to a guy like this, who is not even like an elite receiver. So it's possible for that to occur. But when he's producing like this more often than not, just because, like, you know, the one down game happened recently, it was a few weeks ago, and it was against the Giants. It wasn't even a tough matchup, right? So we can't even look at that and say, oh, it's matchup based. It's nothing. It just happened. It was random. He had one bad game. The rest of the time, you have been very happy to have him in your lineup. And I think you're going to be really happy to have him in your lineup this week as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would just kind of note, because I keep saying when Dan Campbell took over the play calling, I think Dan Campbell's done a solid job as the play caller, which is a huge credit to Dan. Looking at like the route data, there's no difference in like, oh, now they've just had him stop running go routes. Like, no, he's been over 20% go route rate the last 3 weeks. He was not, there's only one like game where it was crazy high under John Morton, but there's a game, 27%, the game that he got 0 catches against the Giants, actually, funny enough, that he's like 27% go route, something like that. So the route tree's actually been pretty similar throughout the course of the season. Honestly, a lot of it is just, I think, randomness, the type of player he is. He's always going to be a little bit volatile, and Sam Laporta not being there is actually probably the biggest variable in why he's now getting a higher concentration of the targets. A lot of times we try to make this more complicated than it is, and I'm certainly, Mr. Complicated when it comes to wide receivers and passing games and stuff like that. But it's the same thing that's going on with Michael Wilson. Like, what's going on with Michael Wilson? Well, they had 3 guys that got the football in that offense, and then one of them got removed. So now the 2 other guys are getting the football a lot. And that is kind of what has happened here with Jameson Williams. So that is, again, just a testament to what's going on there in Detroit, Boone.
Yeah, and it all ties back into the Williams stuff, ties back into, like you said, that first conversation that we had when we were going over offenses that might not be quite as good or might have some struggles fantasy-wise. One of them was the Lions, and we mentioned that there were just too many mouths to feed in this offense. And yeah, all of a sudden you take away a guy, and next thing you know, Williams starts to step up, and it's been great. And I don't think people should be worried that it's going to change anytime soon. The tight end position is just not commanding a lot of targets in this offense without Laporta there.
All right, let's get to the next one here. And this was the player I was like, God, do I want to rank this guy or Emeka Egbuka higher? Which would have been a shocking statement to say back in like week 4. Brian Thomas Jr., okay? And look, I'm not trying to go crazy over 87 scoreless yards from this past week's game, but I talked about it with Chris on the recap show that I do think you're starting to see some positive signs from Brian Thomas Jr. One of my bold predictions on our show was that he was going to have a couple of, what did I say, like top 10 or wide receiver 1 weeks. 87 scoreless yards is not going to get you there, but this matchup against the Jets, Boone, pretty good. Am I stupid to say that I've got some trust? Like, I'm not saying I've got some trust. I'm saying I've got some trust in Brian Thomas Jr.
I think the question for me is how much trust do I have in you now? Because you are the best wide receiver analyst in the game. And when you talk about receivers, I make sure that I listen and I factor that in. And I don't really want to trust him. But if I'm going to say some trust, it would be on the low end of some trust. Let's put it that way.
Like I said,
he's
some
not cooked.
Trust.
Yeah. It was nice to see him have a game where, you know, he put up a decent total, and you could spin this. I think I did this one time earlier in the season when we were talking about him, and you look and it's like, he's not one of these guys that just doesn't do anything in the box score, right? He has at least 49 yards or more in 7 of his last 9 games. So he is producing to some level. He's not having as many big games like we saw him have last year, but he is putting something up in the box score. He's not really giving you zeros. And yeah, you mentioned the matchup. The Jags should be able to control this one. They should be able to do what they want. So yeah, some trust, but a very small sum.
Very, very small sum, I think, is fair. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of similar, frankly, to, you know, the conversation we were just having with Emeka Egbuka, where it's like, hey, sometimes at the beginning of the season, Trevor is missing him inaccurate throws, and sometimes he's leaving plays on the field. I think he's starting to leave fewer plays on the field. And shoot, if you're looking at his catchable target rate according to Fantasy Points data is since week 6, that's just a random cutoff point because it was what I was looking at with Emeka there. It's at 83.9%. I'd love to get an 84% catchable freaking target rate to Emeka Egbuka at this point. So look, it's the matchup against the Jets. Like, I am tempted to call him a solid wide receiver 3 start against the New York Jets because they're so pathetic on defense. And I certainly think it's the type of defense too that plays a lot of man coverage, and Brian Thomas can still fry man coverage. So for the most part, it's a fact-finding mission the rest of the way for Brian Thomas in terms of, can he be a bounce-back guy in 2026? Can he be a good dynasty buy low in the offseason? I think there's going to be a couple moments, though, where he puts good games out, and I'm going to call my shot here and say that Week 15 is going to be one of those games. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I'm sure all the people in their consolation brackets will love to have him in their lineup this week. That'll be great.
Okay, number one, how dare you? I have a salary cap draft where I spent an obnoxious amount of money on Nico Collins, Bijan Robinson, and Brian Thomas Jr. It was very studs and duds approach. And those are the 3 guys I spent an obnoxious amount of money on. You guys would probably not be surprised to find out the team started 0-3. We have clawed back. We have fought back, and we are 8-6 going into the fantasy playoffs. So, okay, I've got Brian Thomas Jr., and I need it to happen in this week. So I got to have some trust. That's the thing. I have to have the trust. So maybe this is all coming from my emotional needs in this one. One player I didn't draft a single time this offseason, and his kind of weird season has not really affected me in any way. That is DK Metcalf going against the Dolphins, coming off his best game of the season by a lot. Boone, do you have any trust after Aaron Rodgers turned back the clock and remembered that he had this big hulking receiver who, shout out to DK Metcalf, also was a punt gunner in this game too, got out there after Ben Skoranek got hurt. So shout out to DK for doing anything to help his team win.
I don't have a lot of trust though here. It's no trust for me. I mean, I missed on Metcalf last week. And so you mentioned like how, having a guy on your team could impact you. How much does like, missing on a player in my rankings impact my feelings towards them? It probably does a little bit when we get on a show like this and talk about them. I had him down and it wasn't a huge miss. I had him down in like the high end wide receiver 3 range. And I think for good reason, because prior to that game, he was under 50 yards in 5 straight. No touchdowns in any of those 5 games. Like all of a sudden to just go off and 12 targets, 148 yards, 7 catches. Like I'm not exactly sure where that came from. He was barely startable before that. But we know he does have that in his bag. So it's always possible. It's just, the hit rate for him lately has been so far down that just because he had this one game, I don't know that you can have a lot of faith in him here. And I keep mentioning projected point totals because early in the week, that's one of the first things I'm going over and factoring into everything. 41 projected points in this game between the Dolphins and the Steelers on Monday night. So not exactly looking at this one like it's going to be a high scoring affair at all. He could still score a touchdown. He could still break a big play. That's always possible, but he wasn't really doing that a lot before this week. And I don't have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to do it more often than not the rest of the way. So another one of these guys where he could pop up for a good performance, but do you feel good about him in your lineup? Do you have faith? Do you have that trust? I don't, Herman.
Yeah, we're showing the weather report. Might be low of 18 with a chance of snow showers in Pittsburgh for the Dolphins and Steelers on Monday Night Football. How is this game on Monday night? I mean, goodness gracious. I think wide receiver 3 could go well, could go bad. That's sort of the story with DK Metcalf. I think that ranking for him is perfect. The wide receiver 3 type where, yeah, if you need that hammer, maybe that's what he's going to give you on Monday night. Maybe he's going to give you another like 5 catch for 22 yards. We've seen that happen in this season as well.